That's where that is.
Okay, we're good.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Council Oversight Committee meeting of August 11, 2022. We have two items on today's agenda. Agenda item number one, continued discussion regarding the city boards, commissions, and committees. And right now, I'd like to recognize Catherine Walker for a presentation.
Brenda, come on. I'm gonna get away from this.
Bring my big old cup.
Yes. Your other big old cup. Yes, okay. Member Grant's here. I think Mayor Heichel is coming, right?
He was going to.
Okay. So I think all of your work at the retreat is currently being combined into a schedule or assignment to committees. So in the interim, we thought we'd revisit this topic because we have new council members that haven't been included in these discussions yet. We have been waiting on Municode to be recodified because literally every number of every section of the code book is going to change. So it made sense to kind of wait and do these at the end rather than having to go through and renumber it a second time. But that has been delayed. I think it'll be coming forward this fall is my hope, but they're still working on that final draft. So it's just taking a little longer than expected, and they've got to compile all the ordinances they've been holding into that new code. So it's just taking a while. But what I did, I gave this to you guys in June, and I've updated it with the feedback we got back in June. And I didn't know any other way to kind of consolidate all these discussions over 2 years, more than 2 years, almost 3. So I wanted to, that seemed the easiest way, but we started this discussion back in 2019 in October, and March of 2020, November of 2020, we kind of were going through the list of all of our boards and committees and commissions. The goal at the beginning was try and reduce some of those. We have a code provision that requires us to follow the Open Meeting Act for all of our boards and commissions and committees, even when they might not otherwise be required to follow it. And that's great, but it does require staff time because you have to make sure the agenda is posted, you have to make sure the minutes are done, and you have to kind of go through all those steps like we do for council meetings. And so council at that time set out with a goal of let's see if any of these have overlapping roles or duties and whether they could be consolidated. 21 of those 36 committees are established by ordinance, 4 by charter, 5 by resolution, 2 by statute and contract. So, 1 solely by contract, and then 2 by mayoral appointment. So not all of them could be adjusted, done away with, consolidated, but some of them could be, I think was the thinking at the time. After that discussion over the meetings in 2019 and 2020, we kind of put all of those proposals in this memo and then discussed that in April of 2021, August of 2021, and then in June. And so those are where these comments that are kind of color-coded are coming from. The first proposal was to consolidate the Greenbelt Commission and Planning Commission, and then also to make Planning Commission appointments ward-specific. I've got in here the current language from the Greenbelt Commission, if you're not familiar with that, and then the current Planning Commission language in the charter, and what those changes would be. At one point, we were talking about adding this to the charter election. We did not do that, but I don't think the language requiring ward-specific appointments would conflict with what's in the charter, so that could be done by ordinance, I believe, and we could address that. We had talked about adding, again, coming from the standpoint of consolidating these two committees, adding language that said 2 of the appointments would be appointed based upon their interest or expertise regarding open space preservation. When we came back in April, council kind of struggled with that, of whether or not to consolidate it, April 2021. Some liked that it would keep the Greenbelt Commission, that interest in a role, but they didn't want to lose input on important topics to the community. So there were some concerns. When we came back and talked about it in August, there was no longer support for consolidation at all, I don't think. We talked about, could we reduce the Greenbelt Commission meetings to quarterly so that that kind of reduces some of the load on staff and still maintains that opportunity for input. But the Greenbelt Commission is a step in the development timeline. And so if you go to quarterly, we lose out on the timeliness of our consideration of those applications. So in June, we talked about keeping them, let's see. There was support for ward-specific planning commission appointments to be adopted through or implemented through ordinance revision, but there was not support or consensus to change Greenbelt Commission. Proposal 2 was to consolidate the Tree Board, Bicycle Advisory Committee, and the Parks Board. This is another one where we have multiple sources of creation of these committees. The Tree Board's created by ordinance, the Bicycle Advisory Committee is created by resolution, and the Parks Board is created by charter. And so you can see that language in there. We talked about adding some language to the charter election ballot that would consolidate the Tree Board and Parks Board. This is another thing that I don't believe would conflict with what's in the charter, so I think it's something we could also put in ordinance form. And there was consensus to do that. We talked about the Bicycle Advisory Committee and how that doesn't necessarily fit with the Tree Board and the Parks Board. So in June, we talked about keeping that separate and moving forward with consolidation. We did talk too about adding some qualifiers to the appointments to the Parks Board to ensure adequate representation for tree concerns. There's been some discussion about whether those appointments should be ward-specific. And so that's still, I think, a little bit of a question in my mind as I reread through my notes. It's how we want to move forward on that. The third proposal was to rescope the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee. This is a kind of an interesting one. It was created by resolution to oversee the construction of the pet adoption facility in the early 2000s, and they still meet. So they've sort of become permanent, even though they weren't set out to be permanent initially, and so that needs some rescoping. You've got a hand raised. Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading.
Just to back up a little bit, I'm trying to remember from that meeting, I know we had talked about not combining the Bicycle Advisory Committee with the Tree Board and the Parks Board, but hadn't we talked about putting that with the Community Planning and Transportation?
It is a current it's a subcommittee of the CPTC already. So it was, I don't know what council member was the chair whenever it was created in 2007. I can't recall, but it's a subcommittee of a council committee.
Okay.
Yeah, they report directly to that council committee.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I was just
And
trying to
there's
get
more
some
discussion, I
clarification.
think, in my notes, there was more discussion because we had talked about adding it into the Transportation Advisory Committee that had been suggested as a new committee, and then we had that
that's okay.
discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, but, well, do we really need that? They report to CPTC pretty well, so
Okay.
that's like sort of a, if it's not broke kind of scenario.
Gotcha.
So rescoping the Animal Welfare Committee, I think the consensus has been, it obviously needs some adjustment because it was intended to be temporary in the early 2000s and it's continued long beyond that. And so we would need to talk about what those roles would be for the committee. We've had some discussion about including information about promoting education on behalf of the Animal Welfare Center, spaying and neutering, that kind of thing.
I got one other question about that. If we're working with is it the Humane Society in the city to take over running of the shelter, would we still need to have a committee? Or is that something where they could have a committee and report back to us, where that way we don't have to run it?
Yeah,
We were starting to talk about that last time too.
Yeah, and so that's a possibility as we move forward with that proposal. If we wanted the Humane Society to have a committee for Norman issues, we could put that in the contract. And I'm assuming they're willing to agree to that, but if not, it's something that the city could continue to oversee. That's really up to council, and that may be a little benefit to us in the delay that we haven't rewritten this whole thing yet, because maybe that's something you all want to do.
Okay.
Proposal 4, this has been the easiest one all along, eliminate the Children's Rights Coordinating Commission. They haven't met for years, but that is the group that started the Youth Council, and we've continued to do that out of my office. You'll have appointments to that council, I think, by the first meeting in September. And they go from site to site within the city and hear from city staff about how things work, and it's just really an educational opportunity. There's been talk about, when we'll get to this later, but one of the new committees proposed was the Youth Advisory Committee, and there was talk about maybe the Youth Council becomes the Youth Advisory Committee, and so it's not just learning about the city, but it's giving input on city issues from a youth perspective. But, I'm sorry.
So what was the history behind that? Like, why was it created? And what was it supposed to do?
Children's rights.
They,
That was before my time.
years ago, when they basically coordinated with Norman Public Schools and worked with the council, well, they didn't really work with them, but the counselors would bring information to the committee about any issues but they really didn't do much of anything, honestly, in all the time I've been here. And they would get a report from the school system at their meetings, and then they would just discuss it, and then it was just like they were coming to hear about a report. But nothing was ever taking place.
There was no action or follow-up to any of the things presented.
No, because it was just basically them reporting kind of ongoing activities at the school.
Okay.
It wasn't like really children's rights issues.
Okay.
And then it was, later discussed and talked about that the Human Rights Commission could also cover children's rights, obviously, it's all inclusive, and so there really wasn't any need for them to continue to meet.
And they haven't met in
At least 6 or 7
6 or
years.
7 years, that's what I was gonna say.
Did you say that we select those people? You said that that'll be coming soon for us to select.
Oh, on the youth
Youth
council?
council.
Yeah,
We select
I
our
think an
own for
item
each
comes
ward?
to do the.
No, they apply.
Yeah.
They apply, and pretty much, I think all of them that apply get to be in it.
Yes, we haven't
And
exceeded our
it'll just be
limit.
on your agenda so that you can recognize that
Yeah.
they've been.
Gotcha.
And they'll come do a
Okay.
report to you at the end.
That's what I was gonna ask. Do we get to have any interaction with them as our mini ward person? And
You've got one in your ward.
Getting them
They
to
get to
recruit
come.
Son.
students next year.
Oh.
would be
Assuming he
good,
gets
too.
in.
okay,
Yes, everyone gets in, so.
okay, cool.
But it's a great opportunity for people to learn how the city works and as kids, and they're really interested in seeing the water treatment plant, the fire stations, and, adults are too. We've learned in our Citizens Academy, so, it's a pretty fun opportunity for those kids, and I think it might be one of Jeannie Snyder's favorite duties. It's very positive, and they're great kids, so. That will continue in some format regardless of the elimination of the commission, I would think. Increased committee membership on the Board of Adjustment. This would change it from 5 people to 7. We, in the zoning ordinance, require, similar to what we do to you guys, where we have to have 5 votes regardless of how many people show up or whether there are vacancies. We have to have 5 votes to take any action. The BOA has to have 3 members. 3 votes to take any action. And so with 5 people, that can be really challenging because if you have 1 or 2 absent, you need a unanimous vote. It's not a lot of input. So the suggestion here was to increase that to 7 and then require 4 members of the board to vote to make any decision. There's been consistent support for that expansion. We'll include that in the final rewrite unless you all want to change direction. The 6th proposal was to increase committee membership on the Norman Election Commission. It's currently a 5-member committee as well, and I think the idea was, once we started down that path, is why do we have any committees with just 5 members? Maybe we should be a little more uniform about that, and so this would be a 7-member committee, and there's been consistent support for that, so.
I often have, just did yesterday again, have trouble meeting a quorum because they don't meet monthly, they meet around when reports are due. There's a lot of times I have to reschedule, like the one yesterday where I didn't have a quorum, so having more members would help, I think.
Proposal 7, this is kind of the big one, creation of new committees. In 19 and 20, we talked about creating a Senior Issues Committee, Youth Advisory Committee, Transportation Committee, Budget Committee, and Core Norm and Development Committee. And working through that, I think we've, at the last meeting in June, there was no longer support for a core norm and development committee. We kind of talked about the senior committee and thought that's valuable, but couldn't the senior center operator do that effectively without it requiring staff and all of that? We had consensus to rescope and rename the youth council to make sure we're getting input from them on city issues and not just introducing them to city, sort of behind the scenes stuff. We talked about the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, and I was reading my notes, and it seems like the feeling was we really handle those topics pretty well in CPTC and the Community Planning and Transportation Committee. And if something came up where we needed additional input, we could have an ad hoc committee for that particular issue, if that's what council wanted. And as I said before, there was not support to roll the Bicycle Advisory Committee into that committee or any other.
Second, go ahead.
So in regards to an ad hoc committee, if we have an ad, like we did for like Center City, so we create one and then we have a length of time that they're gonna work on a specific project or something that's coming up, like our new transportation plan or, whatever, that looks like. So it would be kind of like time bound.
Yes, and we typically do those by resolution, and we'll define that term in there, and it may just be upon adoption of the plan or whatever, it depends on the committee, and how they would be appointed, who's qualified to be on the committee, that kind of thing. That's all typically handled by resolution, and then at the conclusion of that project, that committee's disbanded. It was that way with the Charter Review Commission committee or commission as well.
Okay. I guess just for clarification too, are they in that committee is currently meeting or not, or it's just like we wanted to create one?
You want.
Okay.
There was talk about creating one.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I think personally I think the ad hoc decision would be the way to go with that.
Yeah, there's probably not enough material for a committee
Consistently.
regularly, but certainly there are times when you'll want one.
Yeah. Okay.
We talked about the budget committee too, and I think the consensus was that could be a subcommittee of the council finance committee. I think Councilmember Studley was saying we should have ward-specific appointments to that. And they would meet, I think we said September through March, so essentially through the receipt of the audit from last year's operations and then through the budget process before it gets to council. So it wouldn't be year-round. And then finally, I think this is the last proposal 8. We wanted to be consistent with our committee appointments. We're all over the place in terms of number of terms, how long the terms are. And so this would be a really large-scale amendment, and this is why we've been kind of waiting on the recodification. This is going to be a huge ordinance. But it would address those issues. So 3-year terms, a 3-term limit. We recognize, I think, on the committee that there are some of our committees require pretty specialized experience, and we have longstanding members for a reason. And so I think council has said they don't really want to kick people off all at once. You want to kind of be staggered about it and have the opportunity and the flexibility to maintain some of those long-term members so we can continue to take advantage of their expertise.
Go ahead.
If we adopt that and somebody, like you said, they're the only expert in this and nobody else is coming forward, but this rule is in here that they can't serve more than 3 terms, is there any exception we could make with that?
Yeah, I'll have to draft something that would give you guys the flexibility.
Like, if there's no one else applying that is
Except-
qualified, then,
Yeah.
okay.
Is it the way that this is saying, it's not 3 terms, right? It's 1 3-year term.
A 3-year term, but no more than 3 terms
Okay.
in a row, yeah. Yeah, and we've had the question, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Go ahead.
We've had the question about, could we add an appointment to the Norman Housing Authority? We talked about that last June. That's governed by state law, and it says 5 people, and so that's what we have. EDAB has asked about the ability, that's the Economic Development Advisory Board, the ability to appoint subcommittees if some particular project came up or some issue came up. And I think it was your suggestion, Councilmember Schuler, that maybe we look at language that authorizes subcommittees to be appointed, but with the consent of council, so that doesn't get out of control, and it helps ensure that staff's not spread too thin. And this is an issue I think Brenda brought to my attention after the last meeting. We've had a number of times vacancies on boards and commissions that come up within the last 2 months of the term. And so it feels like you appoint someone to fill the vacancy and almost immediately you turn around to appoint them again. So we wanted to see if you all would consider adding some language that would allow that appointment to move forward for the next term if they're appointed to fill a vacancy within 60 days of the expiration of the prior term.
Yeah, I think, short answer, yes, because I think that is confusing. And it's confusing for people when they're looking at like our website, like where the terms are, and then if there is that vacancy, and then they're like, wait, I'm getting appointed and I thought it was for a 2-year term or a 3-year term, and why is it only, for a month or whatever? And so I think I would just ask that that's pretty clear to whoever's getting appointed next, that, okay, you've got this vacancy and then the next term, like this is the full length of commitment, because when I was appointed to a committee, I was filling a vacancy on it, but I didn't know that. And then when I was looking on the website, I know, was looking, I was like, wait, why did I got appointed with somebody else who was appointed to a full term, and then I was only appointed to a partial term, and that was confusing to me. So if we can just make that clear when we're explaining and expressing that to our residents that are going to be rolling onto boards or commissions, that would, I think, be really helpful. That's administrative, but
Yeah, we can
Just some
include that in the letter we
in the
send
letter.
out. It should be in there already, but we can tweak that where it's.
well, and I
more-
think sometimes too the letter gets delayed from when you're actually getting emails from the staff member who is staffing the committee, and when you're looking on the website, and sometimes the timelines don't always add up. So if we're just maybe a little bit more clear on the front end, that would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
So, I'll just kind of go down the list, I guess. On the planning commission and others being ward-specific, I've evolved my position a little bit on it in the way that I definitely have a preference for it to be ward-specific. But maybe have some latitude where if all else fails and we can't find anybody in that ward, that we could look at other applicants. But I do want to avoid a situation with planning commission now where we've had, I think, we had at one time, we had 3 from Ward 3 and none from Ward 7, 6, and 5. And so a little uneven, especially thinking about Ward 5 not having anybody on. Maybe if any ward, maybe they would have 2, just given the size of it. But a definite, like, some wording that's a strong preference for trying to fill them ward specific, but not necessarily set in stone where it sits vacant if we can't find anybody. So
Yeah, there could definitely be something if this is
Yeah.
filled by so long, it can be filled by.
and it's not always easy to find somebody
An at-large.
to fill some of these. So I've had trouble myself with some of them. The bicycle advisory board and a transit commission or something like that. I thought there could be a potential that the role of the bicycle advisory subcommittee could be expanded as far as a citizen involvement in transit or transportation issues. That could be some way to get more transportation-oriented feedback through an existing committee. Or maybe it has a couple more members on it, I'm not sure, but I agree with not needing to create a new committee for that. And then tree board being with parks, I thought that was a good one. And making the animal welfare oversight. Yeah, that's always a pretty hot topic, animal welfare issues. Ongoing issues with the shelter. If we end up contracting it out to someone else to run it, having some sort of citizen oversight could be helpful for the council. So I'm okay with keeping it, but looking at what their responsibilities actually are going forward, I think is something we should, so they have maybe a bit more direction about what their purpose is too.
You mean like keep it within the city or?
Not necessarily.
So
It could be
you're-
the whoever we contracted out
Okay.
to, but it being a
And
stipulation from the city
reporting
that
to us.
that we
Right.
do want you
Yes.
to make, we want to make sure you have, that there is an active citizen oversight and that
Yes.
they're,
Yeah, okay.
And then I agree with the Children's Rights Commission changes, the term changes, the Election Commission, same thing, I'm fine with that. And the new committees, same thing with the senior center, the contractor, just making it clear that our expectation is that they have a senior committee. And good with the youth advisory committee and them having a more active role. It'd be nice to see them help maybe even recruit other high school for the next year's youth council and things like that. And I think Port Ormond Development Committee, that one fell off, and I think, if I recall, Councilmember Hall was supportive of not going forward with that one. And, yeah, terms, okay with that. And, okay with subcommittees, but with approval of council, so, yeah. That's my opinion currently.
Anybody else?
No, I concur. Me too.
I know.
Just make a note-taking
Been
really
lengthy
easy.
discussions to get to this point, but I think, yeah,
Yeah.
continue to tighten up.
What I would like to see, since it's a team effort, and this is mainly on the backs, the work of staff, I would like to see what staff has to say and their suggestions that will make their jobs easier. You're like, get rid of all of them, I'm sure. We don't need any committees, but I mean, I would like that. I would like that input from you guys to say, this is what we think would work best. And we compare it to what we have with the work that's been going on for
Wasn't there a
several years.
presentation on that?
Yeah, I think maybe that was the initial presentation, is
Yeah.
looking at, I've got it somewhere in this messy folder, looking at what committees had overlapping duties. I think Parks Board
This
and
is like,
Tree Board is
we've already
a-
seen all that. This is the end
Yeah.
results of all of that, so.
Brenda made a big chart way back
Yeah.
when, in 2019.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think Greenbelt Commission is a tough one, and that's one that council struggled with and kind of went back and forth on through the discussions, because it does have overlap with Parks Board, Tree Board. I mean, there's similar things, but they definitely do focus more on trails, I think, than any other group.
I would suggest maybe something we could think about. So, does the Greenbelt Commission have to be part of the development process? And could it be a citizen committee that, whose specific interest is Greenbelt, greenways, open space, trails, but maybe they're not part of the development process, so they don't have to meet every single month. They could meet
Yeah.
every other month or something like
I
that.
think, and not have them review like the applications, just provide input on, overall input.
Overall
about
input on-
trails
Bigger
and
picture.
green
On
space.
open space, green space, green belts, trails, continue doing all those things, maybe even expanding those things
Yeah.
for them, but yeah, not be part of that could be one thing we could think about to keep them, but also reduce staff time maybe. Please.
I completely agree with you. We've got several commissioners that have some wonderful ideas. I think most of you saw the presentation that Commissioner Nanny did
Yes.
a couple months ago. He's got some great ideas, but Greenbelt really has no teeth, so to speak. They look at the preliminary plats that come in, and they would like to see more, trails and open space and stuff like that, but It's just a recommendation. And then the priority trails that he showed you when he came in for the presentation and everything, if they had the ability to focus on those, as opposed to, you know, the master plan that we have right now still goes way out east and it follows the Little River Trail and stuff like that. And as we know from when it went to council before, that's probably never going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a wonderful idea. I think they really do feel like their hands are tied, but they've got some really good ideas, and if they could do that, it would be good.
Councilmember Sherman?
Yeah, I mean, to that point, so I think that our concern with losing Greenbelt in the process of development is really that check and that kind of, I guess, looking over those plats and to make sure, like, are we looking at trees? Are we looking at Greenbelt? How does this fit within the plan? And so I'm wondering, is there a way to retain some of that spirit within Planning Commission if we're going to move away from having Greenbelt as a piece of the development kind of timeline or process? Because I think that I do hear our planning commissioners talk about like what Greenbelt said, and they get questions from, you know, our Greenbelt Commission. And so how is there a way to retain the important, you know, contribution that they're making in the process for development, especially in the areas of expertise that they have, but provide some more flexibility for the timeline for, you know, development? So like what is the right mix for that, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out. Because I'm, you know, I think there will be many people concerned about losing that piece. And what does that do for our oversight? Even if it doesn't feel like it has teeth now, it still is a check. It still is a look at what those plans are doing and how they incorporate kind of our Greenbelt spirit, I guess. So those are just things that I'm concerned about.
Member Holman?
Maybe one suggestion would be that maybe they're not in the development process, but they are, like their role expands to they look at all of our development policies, specifically the ones regarding open space and green belts and trees, parkland, and make recommendations to city council about changes that should be made. So instead of maybe reviewing every single individual development, they're looking at our whole policy, the policy that governs every development that comes forward anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good suggestion to like tighten up those things so that once coming to planning, they've got some more, I guess, boundaries. Does that feel right? Yeah.
So another kind of an overlap is, you know, when we bring preliminary plats forward, when we do the COSs and everything, those requirements come forward with the trail easements and stuff like that through those preliminary plats and the COS. And that is in the subregs, and that is required. So they're already there when Greenbelt sees those, you know. So I think that there are some overlaps that will still get that. I don't want to take anything away from them by any means. That's not at all it. Like I said, they've got some really good ideas, and they're very invested in this. But it's funny, we're getting ready to do Greenbelt for next week, right? And so we have the agenda that's getting ready to go out, and it was 2019 the last time we had an agenda item off consent for Greenbelt. Everything is on consent because there are typically no opportunities other than the trail easement that's coming through with the preliminary plat or the COS.
So I would want them to look at our policy on trail easements and tell us, you know, that's maybe not good enough, or it needs to be more, or doesn't go far enough, or whatever, which maybe give them more of what you say they're doing now, I guess. Yeah, okay.
Any further questions, input? No? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 2, the staff report on homeless activity.
That was attached to, I sent out an updated one this afternoon,
You
so.
can find it in all your emails that you've received.
But it's also on, attached to the
I
agenda.
did reattach it, so,
Can I ask a
Lisa is
question?
out of town this week, but Jane's here if you have questions.
I'm just curious about the stuff that was taken out, because my question was why was it in there in the first place? Where was the information found? But I didn't get an answer. It was just removed.
Might be because Lisa's out of town.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough.
Like turned around there.
That's okay, yeah, and I'm sorry, she is out of town, so.
And then also
She just
with the
updated something.
discrepancies about the date, the dates. So is that just because Lisa wrote this, so we can't really change it, or?
It's not that we can't change it, it's just that honestly, I'm not familiar with the dates and everything. I mean, you said it was I don't have your email in front of me, but it says in here it was on, you're talking about the June 20th date?
Yeah, and it actually started on the 19th.
On the 19th.
The 20th is whenever there was a protest out there. After the demolition
Clearing
had
started on
already
the
started.
19th.
Yes, they had already started on the 19th.
And I mean, I'm happy to amend it further because we can put it back out once we get that and everything. But it's, I don't want to speak for her and say something wrong.
I have more questions, but I'll wait till you do the presentation.
Well, the memo just outlines what has happened at the emergency shelter, and that was when the 30-day notice was received. And the shelter had their last night of operations on June 26th and 27th. And the ESG has been closed out, and ODOC has received back the $89,000. Then the RFP that went out for the emergency shelter that we had Salvation Army and Food and Shelter had applied for it, and that is still being evaluated. We don't have any decisions back on that yet. And then the Continuum of Care applicant, a collaborative applicant, has been transferred over from the City of Norman to the Thunderbird Clubhouse.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We didn't read that part.
Good to hear. Great Thunderbird Clubhouse.
It's awesome.
So my questions are on the last portion about the Crest encampment, which you didn't read. I don't know if you want to read any of that, but
Oh, I can, I just didn't know. Just that so I guess the private contractors began clearing the UMP site north of Crest in July, and then on, so June 19th? I'm
No, I
sorry, I think
think-
that's wrong, isn't it, the way that's,
June 20th is correct. It's later, I think, in the paragraph you were talking about, July 20th, right? Where it talks
Yes,
about the
yes,
purchase.
sorry.
Yeah.
okay, so and then on June 19th, the city was informed by the contractor that construction would begin, and that there was evidence of an encampment.
I don't think that was it. I think you were saying, the point about June 19th was the last line,
It's July,
the work,
July 19th. Yeah.
or whatever.
That
the-
last
the
paragraph
work.
that was in here previously.
Oh, that was taken
Yeah,
out, oh, okay.
that's why you're looking at the
I'm
new
looking at
version,
the
that's
other,
why.
okay, so sorry, so sorry, yeah, I was up at the top and I wasn't putting those together. Okay, so in the last paragraph that I did take out because I can't expand on that, so it does say, on Tuesday, July 19th, Caravans announced that a protest would be held on the site on July 20th, so then it should be July 20th,
It was the commencement of work was on.
July
the
19th.
Yeah.
July 19th, okay.
So
So,
that should be in, or either the last.
yeah, it's not on the new one about the date that started, but I've got a few questions with that, just because we've watched the progress of this throughout Norman over the last few years, and I have always seen, even on private property, a notice to vacate be posted up. Why was that not done here?
I'll jump in, Jane.
I'm not sure.
It's required for public property. We ask our Parks Department to do that, or Police Department, whoever's going to go clear on public property. It's not required on private property. It's
Right,
really up to them,
I
but
get
when
that.
when we've been able to coordinate with property owners, we have recommended that. In this case, I think it was all happening with an application to develop, and so I don't think that conversation happened.
But it says in this report that on June 20th, that the city was made aware that this was happening and that the city was aware that there was people down in that encampment. So again, on other private properties, we have done that and posted a sign. So is there a way that we can say, as a city, like outside of the private property owner, as a city, just out of a good faith effort to post a sign like that so that there's not a shock the day before?
Yeah, I think that's something we could look at codifying possibly. It's not required, and when it's been done in other circumstances with private property, I'm thinking of the area down by I-35 bridge.
And Carter Camp?
They printed those signs, they put them up. We did not do that, but we told them this is what we typically do when we clear out an encampment. And we provide 72 hours minimum notice, that kind of thing, and signage. And so I think we gave them that language and they chose to put those up.
And then the Carter Camp was also private property.
Yeah.
And so the other piece to that, though, is when they started tearing down the trees, they didn't do their due diligence that I believe is done with planning or something like that, where they're required to do stormwater mitigation before start tearing some of that stuff down. And whenever the city was called and notified about it, and they agreed, yes, that it hadn't been done, well, they can fine them and give them 15 days to mitigate, but how do you mitigate a situation when the trees are already torn down? You can't go back and do the work. So why do we, I'm sorry, what?
That's public works. That
Yeah,
would be
typically,
it. Sean.
and they will talk to our office through this process usually, so this is the reason I know. Typically, their stormwater department will do a notice of violation to the developer. And the goal is always compliance, because penalizing them doesn't necessarily get the erosion controls up. We want those erosion controls up. And so they do the notice of violation and say, by this date, you need to get those in place.
Has that been done?
Yes, and I went up the other day and it's all up from what I can tell. I'm not the stormwater expert, but I can see the silt fences and those kind of things that you would typically see.
And I did see a sign, I was by there today, an NOI, the notice
Those of
of
intent.
intent that they get from the state, that signs up.
Yeah.
But that's a common practice then, that we just allow in the city of Norman to do things backwards, or?
Well, we aren't always on site. We're never on site typically when they start that process. So once we learn of it, we make contact, reach out, give them an NOV, and tell them you've got to comply. And typically they will come into compliance. Sometimes it's people new to Norman. Sometimes it's just people not doing the right thing. And we do file charges occasionally, but our goal with any code issue is typically compliance.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so when you say code issue, that would be similar to what any resident would have a code violation, like for grass or for something else.
Yeah,
You would
our-
give notice and then give a time. So
Yeah.
that's the same case that you're referring to with this property.
Yeah, compliance is more important than collecting a fine. And the fine, because it's a municipal court charge, can take time because they come in, set a court date, then, 6 weeks, you go to the court date and they're fined. That doesn't really fix the problem. And so we work really hard to get them to come into compliance earlier rather than later.
Yes, sir.
So what are they actually doing there? Because I know that's like where the lifestyle center was going to go.
I
sort
asked
of
that
before.
too.
So
There's a plat that they're looking at now, final plat application, and I believe it's for some out parcels right along 24th. And that will be coming to council at some point once it works its way through the internal review.
I assumed it was probably just probably another like strip mall thing, but
What's an
No.
out parcel mean?
Those are just the parcels immediately adjacent to the street. Yeah.
Like Panda Garden, Kirkland's.
But I wasn't sure if that's. I was kind of under the impression, I guess, that the space between Crest and Embassy Suite, or the hotels, was not the lifestyle center anymore,
the
but
town
part
center.
of the the town center,
Yeah.
but was part of the or where a thing could be built if a project were to come forward type.
Yes, and they're not building out the whole project yet. From what I could tell, it's just the out parcels. Now, to get an incentive, they will have to build it a certain way to qualify for an incentive under the project plan.
And they're not doing that we know of.
I can't tell from the plat. I mean, that's lot lines and things like that. I can't tell if it's going to be built in a town center format yet.
But they haven't tried to
They haven't
apply
asked
for
for
an
any money,
incentive or
no.
anything, okay.
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Just following up on the same, I guess, kind of line of questioning as Councilmember Studley about, I guess, timeline. And I do understand that on private like the difference between notice on public and private, and that, there is construction timeline and, they've come to the city and gotten all of their permits and all of that kind of stuff. But also kind of thinking about, as a city, what is our responsibility to be a part of that notice process, and to, I guess, work with that private property owner to make sure that notice does go up, if at all possible, in that with a notice of 72 hours, like where in the timeline, because we knew a month in advance of them clearing the site that there were individuals that were located there. And so I guess what are things that we can do to create the relationships or whatever, like where can we insert that into, I guess, the process of the conversation about you need to give notice and this is what we would like to see. This is kind of our protocol. And you had mentioned something about like codifying that in some kind of capacity. Like what would that look like? What would the process for that be?
Yeah, I'd like to research that more, because what concerns me is how are we drafting, whatever we draft, how does that impact, say, a different situation where it's someone on your private property, maybe you live on 10 acres and you hadn't been to the back part and people are camping back there. Should you be required to post a notice for people who are trespassing on your residential property? Do we think about that differently? And so if we enact a rule like that, I want to think about all the potential impacts, because I think it could come up and be used in different situations that may not be as palatable.
Just even outside of having a rule, though, I guess what is our responsibility?
Legally, I haven't seen a case yet that would say we have to post notice on a private property before they can clear out an encampment. We definitely do that on our property, but there's not any requirement that I'm aware of for doing that on private property.
Yeah, I think the point, though, that some, people are trying to make is that, yes, by legally we don't have to, but what should we do? Mm-hmm. What is the right thing to do as the city to protect, members of our community that are living here? Yeah. And so, yes, legally we're covered, but did we do the right thing?
Yeah, I think the thinking was we'll reach out to the continuum of care and try to get them out there to make sure those folks have somewhere to go. And I can't remember where I read this, but I think they found one full-time resident. I think obviously with the trash, there's been more coming and going throughout time, but and an outreach was made, and he was told he needed to leave, and he refused any assistance. And so those are the situations I think are really hard, because what do you do with someone that doesn't want the assistance?
Yeah, and I think we're finding ourselves in a new situation too, where we are no longer the collaborative applicant with our continuum of care. And so what is the new relationship that the city has with the continuum of care to provide notice and outreach and things like that? And so I think that those are conversations and questions that we need to be thinking about, especially when these things are taking place within our jurisdiction, within our city limits. And so, I think time and time again, we see that we're missing the mark on when we have encampments that are, being removed. And so I think that we need to continue to refine and work on our process to make sure that we're communicating, that all the notice goes out, that, individuals understand, and that we're doing everything in our power to make sure that, people are provided with what they need. So.
Councilmember Stoneman.
And just to piggyback off of what she's saying, like the part with the signs, like, I get it, you know, we can't tell a private citizen to do that, but we own rights of way on a lot of those properties where we could post the sign because it's the right thing to do, regardless of what's legally required. So how do we codify that? Because it has nothing to do with a private business owner at that point. It's if we know that the city owns a portion of that because of the right of way, then I think it's our due diligence to post a sign up there if we know. I don't care if it's 1 or 50 people, that's a person, it's a human life. The second part to that is, I'll just say it, I don't think that the COC reached out like they claim that they did, because every other encampment that I've been to when they have reached out, the first thing I get whenever I get there is, oh my gosh, somebody came out, we're gonna have to leave. Every encampment that I've been to that's closed down in the last 18 months has been that way. Multiple people reach out. This particular encampment, I know for a fact there was 2 families plus a private individual. So there was a minimum of 5 to 7 people, I believe. Me and several other volunteers go there nightly to feed these people. So they were there. We had found them for at least the last 90 days that we were taking meals over there. So I just find it strange that in a 30-day time period, when the COC partners claim to have gone out there, that they only found 1 person, when we were able to nightly deliver meals out there and talk to these people. And not one time did anyone ever say, somebody told me that I had to get off this property, what do I do? Because that's normally what they say. Where do I go? What do I do? Can you help me get out of here? And we never got that.
Yeah, and that's hard because we aren't the case manager, so we do rely on them to go out and do what they say they're gonna do.
So how do we have that type of accountability?
That's a good question.
So can you come back with that? Like, we need to know accountability, and we need to know if we can post signs on the rights of way. Like, that just needs to be done. And maybe come back at the next oversight meeting with that information.
You have another report, so.
Every month.
Yeah.
Councilmember Hall.
Will next month's report have did I miss that earlier, that the numbers and everything will be back? We normally get like the,
Account,
yeah, we have been for several months getting
where it shows like
The
total number of
statistics and stuff.
homeless, how many were housed, how many were.
veterans,
Yeah.
all that stuff, yeah. Now, a lot of that
What's
was
coming from
tied
the
to the
shelter.
shelter, but,
Yeah, that
so,
may be the challenge.
We had
So, okay,
the pit
yeah.
counts too,
Yeah.
well, if, I don't know if we can get a report from any other
or like the
shelters
the
or.
COC.
The COC, ideally, yeah.
I guess that's how you get.
That was pretty helpful to know what the numbers are month by month like that, and being able to compare it to.
Are we growing
Yearly.
in our homeless issue? Are we shrinking? Are we housing people? Are we,
Yeah.
what are we doing?
Doesn't it all come from Lisa?
It comes from the COC
I
partner.
mean, like that would come through her though. Okay.
Okay.
Anybody else? Any other questions? That's it. I'd say this meeting's adjourned.